Okay. All right. Good evening, everybody. So this is Tech Thursdays, episode 71. We have done these episodes consecutively for literally 71 weeks now. We haven't missed an episode, and we often live stream on the weekend as well, occasionally, or recently, quite frequently. So, similar to last week we talked about things pertaining to Zen 5, why it could have possibly been delayed, and we also did a section about Intel and the issues that have been plaguing the CPU. It's actually, I didn't really think it was super serious, but it does seem like it is getting a little out of hand to the point where they are actually doing potentially a class action lawsuit, which we are going to talk about here in a little bit. But yeah, next week is Zen 5, so the reviews for that should be out a week from today. And then the following week, we have the Ryzen 9. So next week is Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 7, and the following week is Ryzen 9. So lots of content regarding AMD's new desktop CPUs, so the Ryzen 9000 series. We're going to be talking about that on the channel a lot in the next several weeks. We're also going to talk about motherboards, the new motherboards that are coming out a little bit later. I think they're coming out, I heard, in September. I went to Micro Center to talk to some of the salespeople to understand a little bit more about the Zen 5 launch. So we are going to talk about that. I heard some interesting information from them. Pretty much public knowledge at this point, but yeah, it was some pretty interesting stuff. So that's what we have in store for the weekly show. Not a whole lot. This might be one of the shorter episodes unless viewers ask questions pertaining to specific technology related things. We might talk about games. There are a few games coming up in the next 2 months or so, but then it's pretty much quiet. There's not a whole lot. I do think when it comes to gaming, because we do talk about games on this channel, in addition to the computer hardware that is used to play these games, I do think next year is going to see a lot more big budget games that are, really good graphics, story, music, whatever, all that stuff. Whereas this year, I think was kind of, it wasn't really a lot. It was mostly franchises selling their name brands, like Final Fantasy, for example. So I think next year will be much more like last year was in terms of the big title releases. But that is neither here nor now. Like, we're going to talk about computer hardware. Like I said several weeks ago, the second half of 2024 is mostly going to be computer hardware focused or just electronics focused, because this is the year of laptops. I think laptops, if you are in the market for a laptop, there are a lot of choices. There's a lot of choices. Especially as this year continues, it's going to start ramping up. The competition in the mobile space has never been this fierce. This is probably the most exciting thing about the technology. For those of you that are into computer hardware, it's all in the mobility. Qualcomm made a big splash. It's kind of undercooked right now. Copilot Plus isn't even really available the way it was shown off at Computex, so it's still going to be months out. AMD just launched the Strix Point. Really, really good processor. The new Zen 5 based mobile chip with the AP or the NPU in the APU. So they've got their XDNA chips in there, all on an SoC. So the AMD platform is actually the best one for laptops right now. But also there's Qualcomm. If you like Apple, Apple's still really good. Although Apple is coming out later this year with their M4, we should probably expect Apple to retake the performance crown in the mobile space away from AMD later this year. And then, of course, Intel will be launching Lunar Lake as well. But the problem with the Lunar Lake is I don't know if Intel's mobile chips will be in large volume until next year. I think that the laptops that come out for Intel there'll be a few of them to choose from this year, but the better ones will probably come out next year, because I think right now it's going to be low volume, because a lot of the news around Lunar Lake is that it's expensive to produce because it's using TSMC's node instead of Intel's node. So Intel's having to pay top dollar for those wafers, and they're not used to that, and it cuts into their profit margins. So I don't really think we're going to see a lot of volume in terms of Lunar Lake laptops until next year. But they will show up in Q4, so they will be available in Q4. But you might not be able to choose, depending on what brand or vendor you like. Like, for example, if you like Lenovo, we probably won't see Lenovo's choices until next year. So it's mostly going to be Asus, Acer, maybe MSI will have something, maybe Gigabyte will have something. I highly doubt it. I think those two will be next year. So if you're in the market for a laptop, it's mostly going to be slim, ultrabook form factor, which is going to be probably the top choice for most people if you're buying this year. But that's basically the mobile market. And of course, Qualcomm is kind of there right now. Things will probably get better for Snapdragon. I think Microsoft, mainly because of Microsoft. I think Microsoft is trying to like kickstart Snapdragon X Elite and get it off the ground. For some reason, Microsoft just wants to go to ARM, and it's probably because of Apple. I don't know what other reason they would have to go and try to push their own operating system into the ARM ecosystem. Like, it's like they're actively trying to do that. So it's like, on the one hand, you have Intel trying to hold on to Microsoft's like, no, don't go. My revenue's at stake, my profit margins. And then Microsoft's like, no, we're going ARM no matter what. It's like, it's going to happen at some point. Maybe not now, but give it a few years. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, Intel's not in good shape. As this headline from WCCF Tech would indicate, Intel Q2 earnings, a horrendous result with a miss on total revenue, DKI gross margin, and EPS. So I'm not building a top-of-the-line build. Honestly, I would not recommend that at all. I wouldn't recommend any of the Intel CPUs right now. I don't know how up-to-date you are on the current news regarding that. We did a whole section on that last week. In fact, we talked about it 2 weeks ago now. Might even be 3 weeks straight. But no, I wouldn't recommend any of the Intel i9s right now. No. I would recommend that you look at the AMD Zen 5 CPUs that are literally coming out in 2 weeks. So the Ryzen 9000 desktop CPUs are coming out, I think, the August 15th, August 8th, and August 15th. That's what I would recommend. So if it's me personally building, right now, I would go with AMD, personally. I can tell you right now, we are using an AMD processor on the live stream PC that we're streaming from right now, and it's rock solid. This is a 16-core 7950X. I will be swapping the CPU at some point in this year to the Ryzen 9000 series. I haven't finalized what CPU we're going to migrate to, but yeah, definitely I would recommend the AMD at this point. I would not recommend Intel. Now, somebody in the chat is mentioning the 12900K. Is the 12900KS even available? I feel like that's not even manufactured anymore. The 12900K is still available, but I don't think the KS is available. I personally would never recommend the KS because it's not worth the extra money. But yeah, if you already have a Z790 board, do you even have the board? Started with the okay, the godlike LG. I don't know, man. I think that's... Oh, you have the 13600K already. Oh, I see. So you already have the Z790. I don't know. Honestly, right now, probably the best CPU for that platform, without having to worry about having to do an RMA in a few months from now would probably be the i7. The i7 14700K is really the only one. That, like, I'm just thinking, if it was me, if it was my money, would I buy an i9 today? And the answer is no, I would not. Because there's too much of a risk of having to do an RMA, and then you're going to have all that downtime. You're basically going to be like 3 weeks without a processor. So I would not do that. I think really the i7 is really the only one. I have heard that the i7 does have the same problem, but it is a lower incident rate of it happening. So, what is the top of the line AMD motherboard? So currently it's X670E. The i7s do have the problem, Nero, but it's not as common. Yeah, Metsing 14700. That's what I was gonna say. Like I said earlier, the i7's really the only one. I would not feel comfortable. Let's put it this way: if it was my money, I don't feel comfortable spending money on an i9 in this current state, especially now. So I guess we're gonna skip over to this story. We'll come back to the other one. Intel is in big trouble. Class action lawsuit for 14th and 13th gen CPU instability issues begin. So, as I said last week and the week before, the i9s right now have a serious problem from manufacturing. What's going to happen sometime this month, supposedly sometime this month, it's supposed to be this month, I don't know if it's going to get delayed or whatever, because we haven't seen anything yet, but sometime in August, Intel is supposed to release BIOS updates that are supposed to mitigate the problem. That doesn't mean it's going to fix the problem. It means it's going to mitigate the problem, which means that it's going to delay the incident rate at which the issue with the CPU degrading can happen. So I did a whole section on... Now, the thing is, the video that I did, that there was a clip format of that video that was posted on this channel earlier this week. That video was actually from a live stream that took place 2 weeks before. So when I made that video talking about potential root cause of the Intel problem, that was like well before it was understood. So I think a lot of people, because a lot of people saw that video, but they didn't watch the original live stream. So some of that stuff was taken out of context. And that was way before we actually had any idea what the problem was. So I was speculating that it was the ring bus, that it was the compute fabric in the middle of the CPU that was degrading. We now know that that is related to the problem, but it might not be the only reason for the problem. So, hey Joe, so you're saying if the CPU is damaged already but not damaged enough to fail, the update will not work. Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. So that is the reason why I cannot recommend an i9, because of that problem. Like, that's a lot of money on a CPU just for it to die prematurely, like 3 or 4 months, 6 months, whatever, from the time you purchase it. Then you're just gonna have to deal with the headache of having to do an RMA, and that's really annoying. So no, I would not recommend that. Really, your only option, if you want to keep that platform, the only option is the i7. And even then, it's not guaranteed, because there are reports of the i7 also having the problem. In fact, there are reports of enterprise businesses having the problem, even on motherboards that don't push the voltages that high. That is how serious this problem is. We're talking literally thousands of CPUs globally failing in the field. So this is unacceptable, and that is why now there was a rumor that this was going to start, and here we go, class action lawsuits beginning. So it truly is the beginning. Intel processor issues class action lawsuit investigation, posted July 30th. Consumers who have purchased the 13 or 14th gen desktop processors. This is the reason why people are recommending you get the 12th gen. I personally would not recommend the 12th gen. And the reason why I would not, so if you have a 13600K today, the 12900K is really going to feel like a side grade at best, because you're going from a 2022 CPU to a 2021 CPU. Let that sink in. If somebody is on a 13 i5 13600K, this is a 2022 product. Remember that. Now, here are the potential alternatives would be the i7 12700K. This is 2021. The i7 or the i9 12900K. This is again 2021. And then the other one would be like the i5 14600K. This is 2023. And then the i7 14700K 2023. So these are the processors based off of when they were released. So this is how we classify the generation. So your choices are not really that great when you look at it. The best choice would probably be the i7 14700K, because that one is the newest one, even though it'll be a year old in a few months. So I personally don't recommend you do anything personally. If you have a 13600K and there's no problems with it, I don't think you actually need to upgrade. So otherwise, the alternatives, and this is what I call the Z690, Z790 platform. The alternative would be the AMD platform, which would be X670E/B650. Now you can find B650E as well. They're kind of rare. I mean, there's some new ones. We talked about a really good one last week, but these would include Ryzen 7000. So the 7950X is a 16-core, 32-thread. There's the Ryzen 7900X, which is a 12-core, 24-thread. Then you have the Ryzen. The other thing, too, is all of the AMD CPUs on desktop today are a homogeneous architecture. That means they're all the same cores. They all have performance cores. There are no E-cores. It's all the same core. So then we have this one, which is an 8-core, 16-thread, and then you have the Ryzen. Well, actually, this is Ryzen 7. I should designate that Ryzen 9, and then Ryzen 5, 7600X. These are the current ones. Now, personally, I don't recommend these because we're about to see a whole bunch of new CPUs literally coming out next week and the following week. So we have the Ryzen 9 9950X. This is a 16-core, 32-thread. The Ryzen 9 9900X, which is a 12-core, 24-thread. These are going to be the fastest CPUs for the consumer desktop for a while, until X3D and until Intel gets their act together, which I don't know what's happening there right now. I mean, they're still trying to get the Lunar Lake stuff. That should come out in October, but I don't know. We have rumors on when that stuff is coming out. But these are the latest ones in terms of the Ryzen lineup. So, and then I guess just to put the model year, this is a 2022 product. All these Ryzen CPUs are 2022. And then the ones that are right here are literally brand new, coming out starting on August 8th. So release date for these is August 8th, 2024. I think. Someone in the chat can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think those are on the 8th. These are on the 15th, I believe. Yeah, I think these are on the 15th. So basically, a week from today, the Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 7, based off of the new Zen 5 architecture, is coming out next Thursday. And then the following Thursday, the flagship Ryzen 9 CPUs are coming out. So this is the reason why I would not recommend Intel, because Intel right now, like, there isn't really a good option. And then I would not recommend the current AMD CPUs either, just because we are literally so close to the launch of a brand new CPU generation, which is backwards compatible with these motherboards. Now, there is a new motherboard platform coming out as well, the X870 and X870E. These are the new chipsets that are designed specifically for the new Zen 5 CPUs, but they will work with the older Ryzen 7000 CPUs as well. So this is the new one. So I guess I'll underline that. This is the new generation of motherboards, I should say, the platform. So, anyway. So what were we talking about, guys? So, there were a handful. Oh, you canceled the 13600K? Wait, I thought you already had the 13600K. So you don't have the computer yet. Then cancel the motherboard. You're going to have to get a different motherboard. We were talking about motherboards last week. Wow, you missed like the perfect live stream for PC builds. We were literally doing hypothetical PC builds on the live stream last week. But yeah, this is kind of the new stuff. Well, not that, but this is new, and then this is new. That's what I would recommend. If you're building a new PC in the next month or two, what I have circled is what I would aim for. Now, you could also get any of these motherboards. You are probably going to have to update the BIOS on these motherboards for them to recognize the Ryzen 9000 series. So just keep that in mind. So, interesting story, guys. So, I did go to Micro Center yesterday evening to talk to the salespeople to understand their perspective on this new CPU launch and the issues with Intel. They said that 13th gen was discontinued. They confirmed for me that 13th gen was discontinued a few months ago. So 13th gen CPUs, that means anything 13600K, 13700, 13900, all that stuff, it is EOL, end of life. Intel no longer manufactures the 13th gen. So again, that's why I do not recommend purchasing 13th gen right now. 13th gen has been replaced effectively as of, I think, late May of this year. The 13th gen has been discontinued in favor of the 12th gen and the 14th gen. Those are the only two generations from Intel that are currently still manufactured. They still make Alder Lake, aka 12th gen, and they still make 14th gen, which is basically 13th gen rebadged. It is Raptor Lake. It is fundamentally the exact same cores, the exact same E cores and P cores. Nothing changed. So that is the reason why they discontinued 13th gen, because literally 14th gen is just 13th gen parading around with a higher number. That's all it is. So Micro Center, their sales staff confirmed that for me. I already said this in a live stream a few months ago that 13th gen was discontinued. In fact, I think there's news articles. If you Google it, you'll see that 13th gen is discontinued as of like a few months back. So where does that leave AMD? Because Intel's kind of a mess right now. They have this class action lawsuit piling up. They have CPUs that are just literally dying prematurely within the warranty period, which is not a good thing for them because it means that their revenue is going down. But the AMD CPUs, they're typically pretty good competition to Intel's 14th gen. However, they're about to launch the 9000 series, which is probably going to be the fastest thing on the market. Now, if you're building a gaming PC, I still strongly recommend waiting for Ryzen 9000 because the alternative would be the X3D. So there is also the Ryzen 9 7950X3D, the Ryzen 9 7900X3D, and the Ryzen 7, everybody's favorite, 7800X3D. This CPU, these CPUs, all three of them were from last year. So these are 2023 CPUs from AMD. So they're only a year old. So they're not super old compared to the Intel ones. Like, that's why, like, if someone was gonna get a 12900K, I just hope that they're aware that they're buying a CPU from 2021. See? So it's like, yeah, you still have the warranty, but you're buying technology that is already starting off pretty old at this point. So that's why I don't really recommend this unless somebody is building a very, very low dollar, like low budget DDR4 based system with an older Z690 motherboard, DDR4 memory. Then the 12th gen kind of makes sense because they can save money. Assuming they have old DDR4 laying around, they can use the DDR4 memory with the 12th gen CPU with a lower cost motherboard. So that to me makes sense if they're on a budget. That is very similar to somebody buying a Ryzen 7 5800X 3D and just continuing to use DDR4. So that's what that looks like. But if someone was going to build a super high-end gaming machine right now, I would probably recommend one of these motherboards and either one of these CPUs or one of these CPUs. But I would not recommend this, and I would not really recommend this at this point in time. Just because they're older and there's just better stuff. So, if your board has such a huge difference, what are we talking about? What's all this stuff about the motherboard? What are we talking about? X870 just adds mandatory Yeah, but there are some differences. X870 probably can hit higher memory speeds. The other thing that no one's talking about is DDR5. We don't know how well X870 will improve the ability to run 4 sticks of DDR5. That's the thing that no one's talking about. Everyone's saying, oh, X870 is, USB 4 plus X670 or XB650. Like, kind of, yes, at the surface level it is, but there might be more to it than that. So, price of the new AM5 or the new AMD. Do we have official prices, guys? Has anyone shown, like, has AMD actually announced the price for these things? I don't know. Is the price actually official yet? Does anybody actually know? I don't know if it's officially 2 retailers leaked it. I don't know if it's actually officially stated what the price is. Best Buy and Amazon have stated the price. Do we know what the prices are then? I would guess that the price of the top one would be anywhere from $599 to like $649. If I had to guess. Now, I don't know, guys. I don't know. But this is what I would guess the first one would be. Like the flagship. The flagship is probably $599 to $649. And then for this one, is probably going to be $499 to $549. Now, keep in mind, this is me guessing based off of historical pricing for these things. So this one would be, I would probably guess $349 to $449. I don't know. I'm just thinking like that would probably be the range, and then this one would be $249 to $299. I'm guessing. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. This is just an educated guess. Their listings are cheaper than Zen 4. There's an article on video cards. What's the most RAM for high end? What speed? Man, we did all of this last week. all these questions you're asking were answered last week. There's a section of last week's live stream that I need to turn into a clipped video. All the questions about RAM, like, remember guys, we were talking last week about how to build a balanced PC and how I defined how much RAM. The amount of RAM that you should put in your computer depends on how many cores you have in the CPU. Remember that whole section? And then Marcel was like, where's the document from Adobe about that? that whole section needs to be its own video. That whole thing, that explain all these questions, how much RAM, blah, blah, blah. All that stuff was addressed last week. Man, Francisco, you missed like the perfect episode. Yeah, I'll have to. I think the timestamps are in that live stream. I have to go back and check. I think they are in there. You just posted it? Okay, hold on. I'm not even on the Discord real quick. Hold on. The video card Z. Okay, hold on. Ryzen 9000 pricing emerges. Okay. All right, let me see. Put it over here. Okay. Let me switch this over. Okay, so this is the leaked article. Ryzen 9000 pricing emerges. 9950X at $599 now. Okay, so I said that was the lower part of my range. Oh, that's good. These are actually all on the lower side of what I was stating. That's good. If this is official, if this is real, then those are actually decent prices. Right off the bat, that's very good. If that's the launch price, those are good prices for launch. These are typically like the prices that you would see around December. Like after the product's been out on the market for a while. If these are real, these are good prices to start. Wow. We need to know the Infinity Fabric clock on the 9000. It's rumored to be able to handle 2400. And that's the reason why I was telling you guys, if it's 2400, then the upper limit or the upper bound for Expo would be 9600 on the DDR5. And I've explained previously how to derive that. What I don't know is the lower bound sweet spot for Gear 1. That is what I don't know. No, why would it be DDR5 6800? Why would that be the number? So think about it like this, guys. Remember what I said, what I've said several times for the DDR5. Remember, so DDR5 for Ryzen 7000. So for the current generation, remember that they said that for Gear 1 was 6000 on the DDR5, but Gear 2 was 8000. I have like 2 videos on the channel talking about this and proving this. And even showing this, like I have 8000 literally running on 2 different AMD systems right now. Both of my X3Ds, both of the X3D CPUs, both the Ryzen 9 7950X and the Ryzen 7 7800 X3D. Did I say 7950X? I meant 7950X3D. So both X3D CPUs that I have, this one and this one, both are running 48 gigabytes at 8000. They've been running like this since I made that video, which was like, I think I made that video back in February or something. They've been running 8000 for a long time, 100% stable with no problems on 2 different motherboards. And get this, both of those motherboards that are running 8000 DDR5 are less than $300. We're talking like sub $300 budget motherboards able to hit 8000 with 2 different CPUs. That means that the IMC on the Ryzen is typically pretty reliable, And the motherboards are pretty good at handling high speeds, despite the fact that both of those motherboards are relatively cheap. One is an X670 Aorus Elite from Gigabyte, and the other is a Steel Legend from ASRock. Both of them are 4 DIMM motherboards and are running the 2 sticks at 8,000. So, and we're running it at low voltages. Low voltages. I am running super low voltage. Like, we're talking like VSOC equals 1.2 volts, guy, or 1.18 volts. We'll round it up. We'll say 1.2 volts. VSOC. VDD, VDDQ, you know what that's running at? 1.35 volts. That's it. 1.35 volts, 8,000. 1.2 volt VSOC, 8,000. Now that is what I'm talking about. 2 different CPUs, 2 different motherboards, 100% stable, no problems. I can literally like live stream for like 10 hours running random games while cycling the computer, running the computer hard, and not a single crash, not a single error. So that's pretty good. But anyway, the point is, this is the upper bound for Gear 2 on Ryzen 7000. Now, here's where it gets interesting. What about Ryzen 9000? So if we go here, down here, DDR5 for Ryzen 9000, Gear 1 is currently unknown. It's unknown. Gear 2 is 9600. I'm stating that. I don't know that, but I can prove this mathematically. Regardless of whether there's DDR5 commercially available that can hit this speed, this should be an obtainable speed from the CPU's perspective. From the Ryzen 9000 CPU's perspective, 9600 megatransfers DDR5 should be possible. However, the challenge is going to be, is there DDR5 that can actually run at that speed? Or does it have to be overclocked? And if it's reachable via overclock, what actual RAM kit would you need to purchase to be able to run it at 9600? So, but the lower bound, so the 1-to-1 ratio speed, we don't know. Because we don't know. See, here's the thing that we don't know. The rumor, so the first one, so you guys understand why 6,000, why everyone says, oh, 6,000 is the sweet spot for Ryzen 7000. I think the audience, most people watching this content probably understand where that number comes from, how we're able to derive that number. The question is, does the audience understand why 8,000 is the upper limit for Gear 2? Because if you understand why 8,000 is the upper bound target DRAM frequency or mega transfer for DDR5 when in Gear 2 mode, then you would be able to understand why I'm saying 9600 is the new target for the new upcoming Ryzen 9000 CPUs. See, what I can't say is this. This is a big mystery to me. I won't know this until I get the CPU in hand. So, what are we talking about? People are not even talking about the RAM. People are talking about something else. They're talking about core frequency. I don't even know what the chat's talking about. But anyway, so here, I'll give you guys a hint. So for Gear 1 is dependent on the U clock speed. Gear 2 is dependent on the F clock speed. So likewise, the same applies to Zen 5, which is Ryzen 9000. So we don't really know. Met saying 6400 is where you expect the Gear 1 to be. If that's the case, I'll be very happy with that. Because I currently have... My main RAM kits that I use are 6400 kits. I have 2 kits of 96 gigabytes total, so it's 2x48, and those have an XMP profile for 6400, and that's what I currently have in this machine that I'm using right now. So, if that's true, I might actually just go Gear 1 mode and just like set it to 6400 and forget about it. But yeah, that would be nice if that is true. That would be a nice target speed, to be honest, for Gear 1. Because that's currently not. Like, 6,000 is definitely the target right now. Some can do 62, but it's really 6,000. Your DDR4 64 is a new sweet spot. Yeah, okay, you're saying that too. Yeah, that would be good. I would be happy with that. Personally, I'd be actually very happy if that was the case. Because that's what I already have. See, like, the hard part is going to figure out, like, where's the RAM that can do this? Like, that can regularly do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the thing. Which CPU? So, on launch day, I will be getting the 9700X. But at some point, I hope to be able to review the 9950X as well. So... yeah, but that's not easy, Matt. You have to have a very good IMC to be able to do that. Not everybody can do that stable. 6400 on Zen 4 is not easy. You have to have a golden chip basically to do that. Of the how many Zen? So I have what? 1, 2, 3. I have 4 Zen 4 CPUs. None of them can do 6400 stable in Gear 1. So, so I don't know. I mean, they can all do 8000 pretty easily, but none of them can do 6400 Gear 1. Now, the question is, does X870 make that easier to obtain? Possibly the 9600 will require X670. See, the thing with the X, or did I say X6? I meant X870. So X670, I don't know. We don't really know what the upper bound on X670 is. Maybe on a 2-DIMM motherboard, X670E can get up to like 8400 or something, no problem. But I haven't tried to overclock. The best RAM that I have is rated for 8000. It's an XMP kit that can do 8000. Now, I have not tried to overclock it to like 82, 84, so I don't know what the upper bound is. Usually, if you want to find out what the limiting factor is, you want to have RAM that is rated for a very, very high speed, you know, like the highest possible speed you can get, like 84, 86, one of those. And then you try to overclock it. Well, you assume you're able to get it to even run on your motherboard at that speed. Assuming you can do that, then you would try clocking it even higher. But then at that point, it's still kind of a question mark. Is the limit the RAM itself, or is the limit the motherboard, or is the limit the CPU? See, so that's the reason why when I overclock RAM, I'm trying to limit the number of variables that could be causing me to not hit a target frequency, because I don't know if it's RAM, if it's the CPU, if it's the motherboard. There's 3 variables typically, and you try to get the best RAM you can to eliminate the RAM being the problem, so that leaves only the CPU and the motherboard. That's why the Gene is the best and the easiest to get 8000. Well, see, on AMD, you don't need a Gene to hit 8000. You just need an 8-layer motherboard. And any 4-DIMM motherboard can do 8000 with 2 sticks, as I stated earlier. But I think we're talking about... Oh, you're saying the Gear 1 doesn't need for Ryzen 9000? I guess so, cuz yeah, I guess I can see that not being a limiting factor by the motherboard. So yeah. But yeah, I expect to get the 9700X on launch day and then see how that goes. You don't think the gamers will buy the 9700 at $399? They will buy the 7800X 3D? I mean, it depends ultimately how it does, right? Here's what I expect to see. I think the 9700X will be faster than the 7800X 3D in all the productivity apps, but in gaming, I think it's going to be back and forth. I think the 9700X will lose some benchmarks against the X3D, but it will actually win against the X3D in some other benchmarks. I don't think it's going to be a clear victory for one or the other when it comes to gaming. I think it's going to be back and forth. They're going to be neck and neck against each other in gaming. So I personally would, well, we'll see. See, the thing that you have to also remember, the thing that I think a lot of people are overlooking, because I see this comparison a lot online. I see a lot of people saying which should I get? 7800X3D or the new upcoming Ryzen 7 9700X. I see this comparison all the time recently. And the thing, a lot of people are saying, oh, just get X3D. There's no reason to wait. It's the best gaming CPU, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, what people haven't really thought about is how does Zen 5 improve memory compatibility? So for example, does Zen 5 train DDR5 faster? Does Zen 5 cache MCR better? No more bugs, for example, where it has to retrain like once a month. Like, is that gone with Zen 5? Is it just automatically fixed with Zen 5? Like, those are the sort of things that I expect to see improved with the newer CPU. These are the things behind the scenes that I think a lot of people aren't thinking about when they're just making a blanket statement like, oh, X3D is the best for gaming. They're not really thinking about the whole package, the actual day-to-day user experience, how it could actually be better on the Zen 5, aka the Ryzen 9000 CPUs. So, we'll see. I think the 9700X will probably be the more refined CPU overall. Guys, this is like saying, okay, forget about the X3D piece of it. This is like saying, should I get a 3800X or 3700X or a 2700X? Why wait for Zen 2 when I can get a Zen Plus for cheap? Like, why get a 3800X or a 3700X next week when I can just get a 2700X now? You know what I'm saying? That's what this sounds like to me. Now, obviously, X3D is different because it's definitely different from, it's like not the same exact comparison. But think about, if anybody remembers the first generation of the Ryzen CPUs. See, I think a lot of people that are thinking about X3D versus the 9700X, they either never built a Zen 1 PC, so they don't remember what it was like with the early days of DDR4 and how Zen 2, aka the Ryzen 3000, was vastly superior in terms of a user experience with DDR4. Like, all of a sudden, 4 sticks worked. All of a sudden, 3600 worked. You know, like, even 3200 didn't really work that well on Zen 1 back in the day. So I think a lot of people don't think about that. Or maybe they never built PCs back then. Maybe they don't know. But there's a whole thing about maturity of platform. And I think the Ryzen 9700X is going to be the superior user experience, especially if you're someone who wants to tune and tweak and overclock your PC. I think with the X3D, you're very limited in terms of what you can do with it. I don't think there's a limitation with the 9700X. I think you'll be able to push DDR5 as far as it'll go. You know, I'm pretty sure there's going to be a better memory controller in there, especially since there's already rumors that the Fabric clock is running faster and all that kinds of stuff. So, personally speaking, if it was me, and if I was building brand new, I would definitely, at the very least, I would wait until the 9700X launches, and that would make my decision. But that being said, knowing what I know from previous generation CPUs, back in the DDR4 era, and now translating that into the DDR5 era, I personally think the Ryzen 9000 is going to be the superior product. Hands down. Even if it loses by like 1 or 2% in gaming. So, but we'll see. I think it's going to be closer than people think in terms of the gaming piece. And the other thing, too, is keep in mind, that CPU's TDP is like 65 watts. So I think it's going to be a pretty fun CPU to overclock. And there's some new stuff like Curve Shaper and some overclocking tools that didn't exist previously that you'll be able to take advantage of. So I kind of think that'll be interesting, personally. So, I mean, newer is usually better, guys. Just remember that. Words of wisdom. Newer is usually better than older when it comes to hardware. You think the Zen 5's pricing is too good? If you were building now, you get 9700X over 7800X 3D, better memory speed, which shows the difference in the next years. I heard no stock cooler included. Yeah, I don't think there's any stock cooler included with any of them, which is a little bit strange, especially on those 65 watt parts. The only thing that you gotta remember is if you are going to be picking up one of these at launch, and you're going to be getting an X670 or B650 motherboard, just know that there's a high probability that you have to update the BIOS. And guys, so the other thing I asked about with the Micro Center sales guy that I talked to yesterday, when I went into the store, I asked him a lot of questions about the motherboards, how they're going to handle the launch. Are there stickers? Like somebody in the chat last week or 2 weeks ago was saying that AMD should just put, or Micro Center or whoever, Newegg, whatever, they should put stickers on the boxes saying that you need to update the BIOS. So this was interesting. So here's what happened. I asked the Micro Center sales employee, if I get a Ryzen 9000 CPU next week, and if I get a motherboard to go with it, do I have to update the BIOS? And his response was very interesting. So let me ask you guys, okay, what do you guys think the sales guy said to answer that question? Let's see. Does anybody know? Let's see what you guys think. If you were the salesperson, well, okay, I don't know if you were the salesperson at Micro Center. What do you think? How do you think the salesperson at Micro Center responded? No, yes. It's like a yes-no question. We have one no, we have two yeses. Somebody mentioned Agisa earlier. Agisa has everything to do with this. So, he said something very interesting. He said that some of the motherboards that have come in recently, we were told, so the guys at the store were told from the manufacturer, in this case, it was everybody's favorite motherboard brand, Asus. Asus told them. So Asus basically shipped them an entire pallet of B650 tough gaming Wi-Fi. So they got all these B650 tough from Asus in the store, ready to go with Zen 5. So Asus told them, these motherboards are good to go. If your customer is going to ask for a Ryzen 9000, recommend our tough gaming because it already has a BIOS that can handle Zen 5. So he knew of one motherboard, one specific model in the store that for sure he could confidently sell it with a Zen 5 CPU, knowing that nothing could go wrong because it has a motherboard BIOS that already supports Zen 5. So, and get this, the Asus BIOS has a Giza 11. So okay, the Asus B650 Tough Gaming Wi-Fi has it shipped with, get this, a Giza 1170 patch A. This is literally the very first BIOS that supports Ryzen 9000. This BIOS was brand new in May of 2024. This is a May BIOS 2024 that is in the store at Micro Center, ready to go on launch day. A Giza 1170. So this is not the latest Giza. This is the first edition. So currently the recommended for Zen 5 is a Giza 1.2.0.0a. So this is the recommended. So technically, even if you get a Tough Gaming on launch day, and you don't have to update the BIOS, because he told me, like, most customers, they don't want to update the BIOS. They recognize that it's a huge hassle. It's a huge headache. It's too much work. Remember, guys, I did a whole thing about this like 2 weeks ago about how nobody wants to update their BIOS. It's too hard. It's asking way too much of the customer. Even if they claim that they've been building PCs for 20 plus years, it's way too hard to update the BIOS. So that way they can confidently sell the Tough Gaming with a Giza 1170, and the customer can fire up their PC with Zen 5 and never look back. But they're literally running like the day one BIOS that has support for Zen 5 CPUs. But currently 1.2.00 is the latest one. So if you were somebody who currently is using an X670 or B650 motherboard, your motherboard probably has, there's a good chance if you go to your motherboard's website and you go to the support section and you look at the downloads for the BIOS, you're probably going to see an Giza 1200 BIOS, because that's the latest one. So I myself have currently updated all of my motherboards. So the Intel one is still waiting for the Intel microcode fix, although I've updated that BIOS like 6 times in the last 3 months. It's crazy. And now we're waiting for another BIOS update. But all my AMD platforms are currently on a Giza, except for my ASRock board. My ASRock board, I think, is still on 1170, because they don't have that one yet. So this is the sort of thing that, yeah, you guys would be surprised. A lot of people that watch my channel, they think nothing of updating the BIOS, but this is like the most anxiety-inducing activity that somebody who wants to build a PC can deal with. So, all right. So the good news is Micro Center does have one specific motherboard that is ready to support Zen 5. However, I did ask him, what if somebody doesn't want to buy Asus? What if somebody wants to buy MSI or Gigabyte or ASRock? Do you have a BIOS? Do you know if those motherboards require a BIOS update, or are they ready to go? And his response was, sometimes you can tell on the box, but then he started looking at the motherboard box and he couldn't really determine what the BIOS was that shipped with it. I then basically gave him a hint, like it was a rhetorical question. I basically told him that on ASRock, now the thing is you have to open the box, and not everyone wants to do that, but because it's a brand new part. But essentially, ASRock actually prints the BIOS version physically on their BIOS chip on the motherboard. So if you buy an ASRock motherboard and you open it up, you unbox the motherboard, and you look at the BIOS chip physically on the ASRock BIOS chip, it will list the BIOS version. So ASRock, as far as I know, is the only one that you can physically examine the motherboard and immediately know whether or not you have to update the BIOS or not. As far as I know, the other 3 brands, and I guess if we're going to add BioStar in there, as far as I know, the other motherboard brands do not print the BIOS on the physical chip. So there's no way of knowing. Now, Gigabyte has revision numbers. That doesn't actually help. That doesn't really tell you anything, really. Unless it's a very, very recent revision. Then maybe it supports Zen 5 day 1. But just know if you're planning on buying a Ryzen 9000 CPU next week or the following week when the flagship part comes out, you're most likely, unless you're buying an Asus B650 Tough Gaming from Micro Center, you're most likely going to have to update the BIOS in order for the CPU to be recognized. I can't stress that enough because I think that this is a topic that is going to be overlooked and no one else is going to talk about. And then people are going to go in, buy the Ryzen CPU, buy some whatever motherboard they want because it looks cool, it has RGB or whatever, and it's not Asus because everybody's hating on Asus for some reason this year. I don't really know why. First there was the whole warranty fiasco, then there was the ROG Ally fiasco, and then there was the burning of the SSD or the micro SD card or whatever, and then so it's just kind of, I don't know, Asus has been in a lot of trouble recently, and then now Intel's in trouble recently, so I don't know, man, it's weird. The market leaders are the ones that everyone's hating on these days in terms of, like, Asus is definitely the biggest motherboard brand by market share, like, for sure. They're a lot larger than the others. MSI will print on the box Ryzen 9000 ready. Really? Did MSI say that? Did anybody from MSI say that, Joe? Because I know MSI has what they call the MSI Insider program. They have those 2 guys over in the EU that live stream occasionally about MSI products. Did they say that? They always do that? See, I didn't know about that. If they do, that's very good. But yeah, that is definitely something that is a topic that I think no one else is really going to talk about. An orange label on the box. Interesting. Okay, well, that would mean that if that's the case, then that motherboard will be another one that's good. It'll most likely have a Giza 1170. What about ASRock? What was the question? ASRock is out? What do you mean ASRock is out? ASRock is out? What does that mean? Like they launched the motherboards? Remember last week somebody showed this like awesome ASRock motherboard? This motherboard is so good. This is like the best motherboard I've ever seen. This motherboard is so top tier. It's hilarious how top tier this motherboard is for the price point. It literally has everything, and it's like sub $300. It's crazy. The reason people hate on Asus is because of RMA. Is that the only reason why? Oh, the chat is blocking your message with the Agisa. Oh, because you're probably typing it with the dots. Type it without the dots. Like say 1170 or 1200. Don't put 1.7. Because it's gonna think it's an IP address, so it's gonna block it. I think that's why it's doing that. Just put the number without the dots. Like 1170 or 1200. You won't buy Asus? Man, everybody's hating on Asus. Poor Asus, man. They're just getting hate from everybody. Intel's getting so much hate, too. Intel's getting so... Well, hey, at least Asus isn't having a class action lawsuit. Intel's now starting to get stuck in a lawsuit. That's not good. Bye-bye 13th gen. 13th gen is already gone, guys. 14th gen is the only one hanging in there. Of course, 12th gen's still around, but I mean, I don't know why anyone would buy that unless they were buying like a really low-budget build with DDR4. Because that CPU is so old. Yeah, it's happening, guys. It's straight up happening now. So, doesn't look good. Doesn't look good, man. Doesn't look good. They've already discontinued 13900K and all the 13th gen. I wouldn't buy 13th gen. Basically, here's the thing, guys. If you're buying a 13th gen today, you're literally buying a CPU that sat in a Newegg, Amazon, or some warehouse for months. Because Intel, I can't believe I almost said AMD, Intel discontinued 13th gen earlier this year. It's EOL. It's end of life. They do not manufacture it anymore. It's done. Okay, so I would not buy 13900 anything. 13, doesn't matter what it is. 13600, I wouldn't buy 13, whatever. The only option, if you want to buy Intel right now, there are two options. There is the 14th gen i5, because apparently those should be okay. The 14700K, because the 14700K doesn't, like, it's not as aggressive with the voltage. And as a result, the i7 is probably okay. But even then, it's still a coin toss. You could still end up getting a bad one. So, but i9, completely out of the question. Do not recommend currently. That is the thing that's in the limelight right now. So, no, definitely stay away from the i9s. Those are the ones that are hot garbage right now in terms of physical manufacturing defects. So, yeah. And then for the 12th gen is okay. Just know that buying a 12th gen in 2024 is like, that's like someone buying a 5800X3D to save a ton of money and keep using DDR4 RAM. That's basically the way I view 12th gen at this point. So, it's not terrible. It's still a good CPU. It's not gonna be the best CPU, I'll tell you that. But it's okay. It's 2021 technology, so it's like, I don't know how I feel buying brand new CPUs that were meant for 2021, 2022 timeframe in 2024. It's never really a good feeling to do that. But anyway, that's like someone who buys like the last year's car model, but the this year's car model has like a complete new refresh. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I don't know about that. I'm not the type of person who buys like the last year car that has the old look when they redid the whole, like, you know what I'm saying? Like a next generation Camry versus like last year's model, which looks older. That's basically how I think of 12th gen. So, I don't know. I classify 12th gen as like the same category as 5800X3D. That's how I classify that CPU. But it's a huge problem. The problem escalated here. Let's look at this a little bit. Talking about this class action lawsuit. So, this article comes from WCCF Tech. Intel in big trouble. Class action lawsuit for 14 and 13 gen CPU instability issues begin. The chip giant is about to face a class action lawsuit for racking up of instability problems arising due to faulty 13 and 14 gen. A law firm has begun investigating the instability and crashing issue, which might face a class action lawsuit. It looks like Intel will have a hard time getting away with such a serious problem with its faulty processors. Guys, the failure rate on these is upwards of over 50% from some of these enterprise customers that have bought literally hundreds, if not a couple thousand, of these CPUs. That is how serious this problem is. We're talking big, big money. We're not talking You and me building our random gaming PC. No, no one cares about us. It's the big gaming companies and the data center customers who bought literally hundreds of these CPUs, installed them as servers, and just to have the servers crash and cause like outages. It's not a good thing to be in that situation if you're the manufacturer. In this case, Intel is in the hot seat. So if the lawsuit gets filed against Intel, it may result in the company to pay compensation to the affected. We already know most of that money is going to go to the lawyers. I mean, those companies will get some of that. So yeah, if Intel works according to its pledge, it could mean a long and hefty RMA process that affects hundreds of thousands, if not millions of chips. The problem escalates. So yeah, when Francisco asked at the beginning of the live stream, like, should he get a 13900KS? I don't think he knew the gravity of the situation. I didn't want to just like drop it all right there, like, you know. We had to kind of slowly ease into it in terms of what's going on here with Intel. The problem escalates to the point the company's negligence, even though the problem has persisted for over a year. See, I didn't know that it was happening for over a year. To me, I only became aware of this problem back in like March of this year. I did a video on how to mitigate the problem in the BIOS back in April. So if you guys are still like in the dark on this, just to be safe, I strongly recommend you look at the video that I made back in April regarding how to power limit the CPU so that it doesn't pull an insane amount of current. Because that typically can prevent the failure from happening because it's so heavily power limited. Just know that if you do what I show in the video, your multi-thread performance is going to fall off a cliff. So it's like you're going to drop from like 38,000 in Cinebench all the way down to like 29,000 or something, or like 31. I show it in the video. I show whatever the Cinebench score is after I do the power limit. It's not good. You basically nuke your i9's multi-thread performance. But the single thread performance is still okay. It's not really, it is affected, but it's very marginal. So in terms of the gaming performance is honestly, with the power limit that I show, gaming performance is not that bad. It's like not nearly affected compared to multi-thread performance. So it's definitely worth doing. Unless you want to deal with an RMA at some point. So, but again, Intel's supposed to release some kind of BIOS update. I mean, they've already been releasing BIOS updates, though, for the last 2 months, so I don't know what this one's going to do that's different, but it might just nerf it into what I show in my video and make that the standard configuration. Who knows? So, anyway, Alderaan games implemented an in-game... Oh, wow. So, the affected processors have resulted in crashes and freezes in games and programs, forcing even game developers to consider AMD-based systems. Last week, we saw Alderaan games implementing an in-game warning window to notify users about the cause of the crashes. There have been cases of 100% failure rate with Intel's high-end Raptor Lake and its refresh. So guys, when it says high-end Raptor Lake, it's talking about the i9-13900K. That's what this says. This is code for 13900K, and then its refresh chips. This is code for 14900K. That have led many users to switch to AMD platforms, especially when Intel did not process the RMA. Oh yeah, that was the other thing. Apparently, Intel was like denying RMAs to individual users. They would never do this to a large company, but to individuals who only had like one CPU, and it was like their one computer, they might deny the RMA for whatever reason. And that was a big problem until recently, but now that this has become so big, now they're pledging to do the RMAs. So we've already created a complete timeline. Okay, that's good that they have this timeline. So basically, December of 2022. Interesting. That is a long time ago. So for those that don't know, the Raptor Lake CPUs initially launched in October of 2022. For example, the 13900K that I currently possess, I purchased this CPU on launch day in October of 2022. So I have had the CPU for over a year and a half at this point. So in October, it'll have been 2 years with the 13900K. But this is alarming to me because I was under the assumption that the problem cannot happen to me because I have a launch edition 13900K. It's special. It's from the very first batch right off the factory. It had all the QC, all the QA. It's the best. All these newer ones are trash. All these 1400Ks are even more garbage. So mine is the best. And that was the mindset that I had. I was like, man, this problem cannot happen to me. Mine's too good. It's from 2022. It's the original, legit, before Intel stopped caring. Mine's the best. But now I'm seeing that the first instance of the dreaded out of video memory issue has been reported as far back as December 2022. That's not good. That is not good. That's not good because I've got one from October of 2022. That's why that's not good. This is a few months after the release. Yeah, that was definitely after the release. Throughout 2023, several users have started reporting crashes and issues in high-profile games such as Callisto Protocol and Hogwarts Legacy, among many others. Both titles are based on Unreal Engine, released in 2023, and feature a shader compilation process at the start. Yeah. This is the dreaded shader compilation that causes the game to crash or the out-of-video memory error to occur. There are currently thousands of such reports reported on Steam community forums and Reddit. Okay, as of February this year, a post by Sebastian brings the issue to the limelight, highlighting the worrying trend of stability issues affecting 14 and 13 CPUs. Again in February, the editor, along with others, start reporting the issue. Oh boy, quickly, it pointed to underclocking. So what I show in my video is I don't do underclocking and I don't do undervolting either. All I do is power limiting, because power limiting will definitely lower the current. The thing that I think a lot of people are overlooking, and I saw a lot of comments on my latest video regarding this topic. People were talking about voltage being the problem. It's not so much the voltage, it's actually the current. It's the electrical current that's pushed through the compute fabric, aka the ring bus, that eventually causes it to fail. A lot of people were correctly stating in the comment section of my video that the voltage of the core system, so like your P core, your E core, that voltage is tied to the ring bus as well. So when the voltage swings high, like 1.5 volts, 1.43 volts, or whatever, on the cores, the ring bus is forced to be driven at that higher voltage, and it is a lot more susceptible to electron migration or damage because it has all the cache piled up there, and it's a fabric, so it's basically like a spider's web having to drive really high voltage. But the problem isn't so much the voltage. The problem is the electrical current, because the electrons, as they traverse through the silicon, through the conductors, the copper interconnects at the microscopic level, when you push a lot of current through these really small connections, that is what's going to cause the failure if it's not engineered well enough to sustain such a massive current flow. And the problem with the Intel CPUs is they're pushing the voltage high in order to hit these higher clock speeds. As a result, the CPUs run really hot. We're talking 100 degrees Celsius, and they pull a lot of watts. But even with adequate cooling, you may be able to control the temperatures. However, you're still not able to control the current, the amount of electrons that are flowing through the interconnects, and that is what's breaking down, severing those connections, or at least damaging them over a long period of time. We're talking like several weeks to several months, depending on the issue, the fault in the design, and that is where the problem is happening. So it is not a voltage problem, it is not a temperature problem, and it is not an overclocking problem, although overclocking can make the problem happen faster. It is a electrical current problem. That is what is the root cause of the problem, because that's what causes electron migration to happen. The breakdown of the conductors, the dielectrics, the silicon, the interconnects, all that stuff breaking down causes the electrons to flow in different paths, and ultimately that's going to cause the CPU to fail. That's how it degrades. So, anyway, NVIDIA blamed Intel back in April. Intel announces it will investigate. Motherboard makers quickly roll out baseline profiles. My video is basically a baseline profile before the motherboard makers rolled out the baseline profile. Intel releases a statement recommending motherboard makers because everyone was complaining. So, and also the other thing that's hilarious is when the motherboard manufacturers were rolling out the baseline profiles, they weren't all the same. Like Asus, in all their infinite wisdom, were still trying to overvolt the CPUs, even on the baseline profiles. That's hilarious. So that it was so bad that Intel themselves were like, hold on, everybody needs to do the same thing. We all need to be on the same page. We'll look into the issue. TBD. Leave us alone. Please stop complaining. Please stop posting Reddit articles complaining about our CPUs crashing. It's not helping. It's just making it worse. We're going to fix the problem. Then a few months went by. Nothing happened. Intel discovers a bug with its TVB microcode. This may or may not have anything to do with the problem, but they were like, oh, there might be a problem with the microcode. We're investigating it. Then Intel denies some RMAs, especially to Hardware Times Editor, who already RMA'd at least 2 CPUs. Okay, Wendell from Level 1 Techs and Steve Burke from Gamers Nexus are the first, this was in July, this was last month, are the first tech media outlets on YouTube to further highlight the instability issues, diving into additional details such as OEM frustration with the matter and a possible recall. Then in July, Gamers Nexus highlights a potential oxidation defect. Now, Intel denied this being the root cause for the majority of the problems, because this was something that they claimed they fixed. This was an issue that happened over a year ago, and they supposedly fixed that. It was a problem with the air conditioning system causing it wasn't dehumidifying the clean room enough, so there was enough moisture in the air in the clean room that the wafers were getting corrupted via oxidation. So they claim they fixed that, though, and I kind of tend to agree with Intel on that. I don't think this is something that would have persisted for a long period of time. So I think the true root cause is something that is not really related to the oxidation. The Intel says the 14 and 13 gen mobile CPUs are not affected by the same instability, and that's because I think the Meteor Lake stuff is using one of the TSMC nodes, if I'm not mistaken, so that probably might be why. And then later on in July, so lots of stuff happened in July. Intel issued a statement confirming that they have found the root cause. We found the problem. We found the glue. They found the root cause of the instability issue, which happens to be elevated operating voltages. So here's the thing. When your voltage is higher, your current should be lower. But if you hold your current, like if you hold it as a given, and you raise voltage, now you have a problem. So that's probably what the microcode fix is supposed to address. I don't know if that's going to fix... So this is not going to fix the problem if you have a CPU that is already suffering from the stability problem. Like this is... You have to do an RMA. There's no way to fix the problem except an RMA. However, if you don't have the problem, you definitely want to update the BIOS immediately once this is available, because it could help prevent the problem from happening. This is more of a prevention, not a cure. That's exactly what this is going to be. Intel confirmed that oxidation issues existed in previous batches. Okay, we already kind of expected that. And that there's no solution for CPUs that are already degraded, which basically, like I just said, you have to do an RMA. And then now, as of August, literally today is the first day of August, the law firm initiates possible class action lawsuits. So to be continued. So that is where we stand currently with this problem. Microcode update puts a cap on the voltage request, but only to slow down the degradation, so the CPU can outlive the warranty. Dude, that sounds shady. That sounds shady. If that's true, that means the CPU will basically die after the warranty and then they can't do the RMA. Wow. Whoa, that actually, that's, the way you worded that sounds so anti-consumer. Oh man, that sounds genius for Intel, dude. That is like the best thing Intel could do right now, actually. Oh man. Can you imagine like the headache that they're having to deal with? Like, it's like somebody at Intel was like, how do we stop all these RMAs from making us lose so much money on these terrible Raptor Lake CPUs? Oh, I know. Let's lower the voltage just so that it's still competitive, generally speaking, but it doesn't fail instantly. Like, it doesn't fail within like the warranty period. So then the CPU will still look okay. We don't have to RMA it. It'll eventually die prematurely. It'll still have like a short lifespan of like 2-3 years or whatever. And then, yeah, then that's it. So everybody who says mine is okay so far will fail in 2 years. Oh, that's not reassuring. So far, guess what, guys? Mine is okay. Mine is okay. I have not had to RMA it yet. I'm waiting for that microcode. I'm waiting for the microcode. Mine is okay. Give me the microcode. It ends up dying like in 2026 or whatever. You're locked at 5.7. All cool. That sounds bad, dude. I would never lock it. I would never lock it. Locking it is going to cause it to fail. Locking is going to cause it to fail. If you have it on a static voltage, that is bad. You're not letting it... First of all, you're not letting it downclock, and you're not letting it idle. So, to me, running it 24/7 at 5.7 gigahertz and 1.385 volts, that is worse than letting it idle. I would not do that. I personally would not do that. That's just setting it up to go into an RMA. You know what I'm saying? Because that's like a static overclock. No one I know does static overclocks anymore. Like most people, especially if you're on Intel, like typically you would let it use adaptive voltage and you would set the multiplier as high as possible. In this case, 5.8 or whatever. And then, or you could do like, I guess per core overclocking. I've never done per core overclocking on an Intel CPU. It's very easy to do on AMD, but I've never done it on Intel. At least in the BIOS. I'm sure it's done in a very similar way though. You lock the... I would never lock it, though. Like, locking it to a fixed speed, to me, is just asking for it to fail. Like, I would never do that. You do realize that the Intel CPUs can downclock all the way to, like, sub 800 megahertz. The thing is the boosting voltage. Yeah, but the problem with that is the problem with doing that is it's all about load line calibration too. just make sure the load line calibration is really low, so your V droop is not, so your V droop compensation is not high, so it shouldn't cause a voltage spike that can cause CPU to fail. So, yeah, man. See, just reading these comments, people having to do this and that to avoid the... Nah, man. You know what I say to that? That's why I'm using this. That's why we're live streaming on one of these. We are live streaming on one of these and not one of these, because I'm not gonna fix all the... Like, that to me, like, that sounds so bad. Locking the thing at like 5.5 or 5.7, that sounds terrible. That sounds terrible. You're not letting the CPU idle properly. You can't use C states when you're doing that. It's just, I don't know. That's like you're turning your CPU into a CPU the way CPUs were managed back in like the late 90s or early 2000s. It just sounds so backwards having to hear that. Like, I don't know. It sounds so bizarre. Do we want to talk about Intel Q2 earnings? I don't know if we need to talk about this. I feel like we've dogged on Intel too much already. A horrendous result with a miss on total revenue, gross margin, EPS. I don't know if we should even bother talking about this. They're having trouble. They're having trouble. And this has nothing, the poor performance in earnings has nothing to do with the CPU problem. It has nothing to do with the CPU problem. This has everything to do with Intel continuing to lose business in the enterprise and the data center market, because EPYC is just crushing them right now in data center, especially in the high end. So I'll say this. Intel maintains their market share as best they can by continuously selling to people who don't know any better. What do I mean by that? So, for example, Intel can easily sell their servers to people who literally just blindly refresh their servers because they're no longer supported every 5 years. So it's like, oh, we're up for renewal. What do we got? Oh, we have Skylake-based servers. What do we do? What's the latest? Comet Lake? No. Rocket Lake? No. Golden Cove? Okay. Sapphire Rapids? Yes. Let's get that because it's new. That is typically how a lot of people make decisions when they're buying. Or it's like, okay, what's the cheapest server with the most amount of memory that I can get with a 5-year contract, with an annual support contract renewal of X amount of dollars, blah, blah, blah. Give me, 200 servers that have whatever the cheapest CPU. That's basically who their customer is. That's who's buying Intel CPUs. Meanwhile, the people who actually know, yes, software, the Xeon refresh. I'm talking about the Xeon refresh. People who don't know anything. They don't know anything about technology. All they know is that they run a data center and their servers are no longer supported, and DDR4 and DDR3 is super old and we need to go to DDR5, but I have no idea what's in the market because I never pay attention to the servers. So what do we got? Okay, Xeon. Ah, yeah, Sapphire Rapids. That sounds good. Let's get one of those. Yeah, that's how they think. They never think about the technology. Like, they don't even know, okay, DDR5 is different from DDR4. It's like, okay, it's a different number. It's like buying a newer iPhone, like it's newer than the older one. That's who is buying Intel right now. So it's like, you know what I'm saying? Meanwhile, you go to Amazon or Microsoft or Google, you know how these guys are? You know how these guys act? You do not want to be dealing with these guys if you don't really know what you're talking about, because They're going to ask you every single little detail about your server. What's the average power consumption? What's our expected power budget on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, on a 24-hour period? What is our OPEX savings percentage for the 3-year versus the 5-year? Can you give me a higher discount on my support contract because I am a loyal customer? Can you tell me what the difference between the new CPU, the dual socket versus a single socket cloud scaler? Like, if you're talking to these type of customers, these customers are not Xeon refreshers. These are people who are like, give me the best server you have and give me a good discount. Those are the type of customers that are, guess what, buying AMD EPYC because they're actually knowledgeable. That is what's happening to Intel. And that is the reason why the Q2 earnings are a horrendous result with a miss on total revenue. So they're not doing too well. Their bread and butter customer is the guy who knows nothing about technology, but is somehow the director or the vice president of some data center or rack and space company that literally does either rent out data center space or VDI application, virtualization hosting, these type of guys who don't actually really know. But the ones who actually look at the technology and are enthusiastic and knowledgeable about this stuff, they're typically switching to AMD. That's what's been happening for the last 5 years. So it is a problem for Intel. Now, having said all of this, what Intel showed off at Computex was very impressive. So Intel is moving to TSMC for their consumer line. Think of Lunar Lake coming to laptops. Those are all TSMC-based SoCs, and they're expensive to produce. There's going to be a lot more like Apple in terms of how they're actually manufacturing what they put in the laptops. However, what about Intel's own foundry? What about Intel's own wafers? Because they are a vertically integrated company. Well, it turns out what they're doing, all those Xeon CPUs for servers, that is what Intel will be continuing to manufacture on their own foundry. And they're doing some pretty interesting things. Like they're going all in on E-cores. They're going with a CPU that I think has like 192 E-cores or some stupid high core count like that. Because AMD's highest on the single socket Bergamo was 128 Zen 4C. So basically AMD's E-core, 128 of those. Intel's got a 192 E-core only server CPU. No P-cores, 100% E-cores, which also means no hyperthreading. So it's 192 cores and 192 threads. So they're planning to sell this thing in the data center. But the only problem is it's very... I think it'll most likely be fine for most x86. But we'll see. It's a very efficient CPU, though, compared to what Intel traditionally puts out. Because it's all E-cores. There's no P-cores anymore. So it's interesting to see that. Zen C cores are... Yeah, you're right. So Zen C is... It's funny because the original word... So when you guys think of Zen 4C, Zen 5C, the C originally stood for cloud. Cloud, like Cloud Strife in Final Fantasy VII, or cloud as in a cloud provider like Apple, Google, Meta. So that's where the C originated. However, over time, I think AMD kind of changed the name just to be more in line with other markets outside of the hyperscaler market. So now the C, technically, I guess it stands for compact. So it's like Zen 4 compact, Zen 5 compact. That's what the C stands for. But the C core still can support SMT, which is very similar to hyperthreading. So every Zen core, it doesn't matter if it's a Zen traditional core or a Zen C or compact core, all of them can support simultaneous multi-threading. So each of them can still do 2 threads, whereas Intel's strong, like heavily moving away from the SMT architecture. Like they're not going to do that. In fact, even on their upcoming desktop CPUs, they will not offer hyperthreading, which means the upcoming new Intel Ultra CPUs for desktop, if they're advertised as a 20 core or a 16 core or a 12 core, they're literally, if it says 12 core, it's 12 thread. If it's 20 core, it's 20 thread. So it's going to be very different from their current CPUs, where, like, for example, on the i9 13900K, this is advertised as a 24 core 32 thread because it's 8 plus 16, but the 8 P cores each do dual thread, so that's like having 16 threads. Then you add the 16 threads from the E cores, you get 32 threads. So it'll be easier to count Intel's thread count going forward, but because they no longer have hyperthreading. But I don't know. I think there's gonna be pros and cons to going with single thread for every core. Intel's going the route AMD did, just spamming cores over a decade ago. Might be too early to pick a winner. Elon is entering. Oh, we weren't even talking about AI. Talking about AI is opening up a whole nother discussion. We can spend the next hour talking about Elon Musk, AI, and Intel, and all that stuff. Like, that is a completely different topic. I don't think we want to go down that road. I don't think we want to go into the AI discussion. Supposedly, Intel's AI accelerator is supposed to be 50% faster than NVIDIA. But no one seems to care. I don't know. You know why? It's because NVIDIA has too much, like... Man, NVIDIA's mindshare is just so stupid. People just blindly... I'm so surprised how nobody knows about anything else. Like, if you say AI, people just immediately just assume that it has something to do with NVIDIA. Like, they don't even know that AMD, let alone Intel, have their own AI accelerators. It's kind of sad. And then the thing is, with the laptops... all these, like, Qualcomm laptops with their NPU, and AMD now with the Ryzen AI with their NPU, it's like NVIDIA sees all that. NVIDIA's like, guys, you don't need those NPUs. It's like, that's low end. Just use a GPU. Of course, NVIDIA's missing the mark because the whole point is energy efficiency. But and because NVIDIA doesn't currently have a consumer-based CPU product with an NPU, they are trying to downplay the competition. But we'll see what happens if NVIDIA enters the CPU market next year, like how their narrative will change. It'll literally do a 180. It'll go from NVIDIA making fun of Qualcomm's TOPS performance to all of a sudden NVIDIA praising the advantages and the energy efficiency of having an NPU in your CPU. So, yeah, anyway. So that's, that's that. Yeah, other than that, I don't know what else to talk about. Like, let's see, what else is in here? Like, Intel. Okay, Intel extended the warranty. That's good. Apple Pocket's unimpressive. $21.4 billion profit. $85.8 billion in revenue. Sometimes I don't understand how Apple is this successful. Like, I don't understand. It's almost like it's a cult. It's like Apple has a cult following. It's like it's its own religion. You know what I'm saying? You got all the people that go to Starbucks and they show off their Apple Mac Air or their MacBook Pro, and they're drinking their Starbucks coffee, their cappuccino, and they're always talking about like how, oh, I think it's time to go and do this on the weekend, or I'm gonna go do that on the weekend. You know, like, and they talk very, very surface level. You know, very shallow surface level, but at the same time they're an Apple cultist. Like, I don't understand how Apple is so successful. I personally don't comprehend how Apple is as successful as they are. I don't understand. I don't get it. I don't know. I don't understand. I don't know, man. Like, Apple, and here's the funny thing. Apple hates Nvidia. Nvidia doesn't like Apple. Yet, for some reason, both companies are so successful. And these are two companies that they make hardware and software. And they're largely successful in the software endeavors. So software is very profitable. Software is much more profitable than hardware, typically. Think about it like this. NVIDIA and AMD make roughly the same products when it comes to AI and it comes to graphics rendering technologies. But if you look at them in a vacuum, if you just take NVIDIA hardware only and AMD hardware only, both companies are very similar. There's almost very few things that distinguish the two companies when you look at them in a vacuum, only evaluating the hardware itself. Now, on the flip side, if you look at the software that NVIDIA has versus the software that AMD has, it's clear that NVIDIA is miles ahead, literally maybe even a decade ahead of AMD in some areas on the software development side. Mainly because NVIDIA has CUDA. NVIDIA has worked with a lot of software companies that make professional applications. They've been working with these guys for years. They have their sales teams collaborate, or at the very least, maintain these customer relationships. Because at the end of the day, it's basically like, how often do you show up for your customers and maintain that relationship? And I think NVIDIA has done a really good job doing that behind the scenes, while at the same time, they've developed the ecosystem that their customer base uses. And they're able to get a lot of buy-in for the technologies that they're developing on the software side. So it creates this positive feedback loop for NVIDIA, where they talk to, for example, game developers or film CGI animators, and they ask them what are their challenges, what are the sort of things that they like to see, and they get feedback from them, and then they go and start working on like frameworks for these things. You know, that's kind of how CUDA got developed back in the day. And because of this, NVIDIA has become very successful, and that's the reason why comparing NVIDIA and AMD like in a vacuum isn't really a proper comparison. It's like, yeah, they both make graphics cards and AI chips, but one of them has this massive, someone said it earlier, walled garden of all this software stuff, and the other one is way behind in terms of trying to catch up. It's like, yeah, in gaming, working with game developers, AMD and NVIDIA are very similar, but it goes way beyond just the gaming market. And I think a lot of my viewers don't see that larger picture. A lot of my viewers aren't aware of the full extent of NVIDIA's empire, so to speak, in terms of their software ecosystem and how massive it is compared to their competitors. And that is one of the reasons why, even if AMD was technically faster than NVIDIA. Let's put it this way. Even when AMD was ahead of NVIDIA, because there were times in history where AMD's graphics cards were objectively superior to NVIDIA's. Even when that was true, NVIDIA was still outselling AMD. Even when they had inferior products. And that is the reason why it goes back to what I said a few minutes ago. It's all about the customer relationship, the ecosystem, building up that ecosystem, building up that walled garden, locking your customers into that technology so they don't want to switch to another competitor. They've maintained that for such a long period of time that even if somebody larger than AMD came into the market to compete directly with NVIDIA on the software piece, it would be an insanely uphill battle, and it would cost literally billions of dollars to even come close to trying to close that gap. Apple was told for at least 5 years to leave China. Instead, they built more factories, now trying to move to places like India. Wait, what does that have to do with what we were talking about? Maybe that was said, that was earlier. Yeah, the walled garden model. The RTX 4090 is not really bottlenecked. So, the thing is, I can't help but think that like when NVIDIA engineers see people talking about the 4090 being bottlenecked, they're just kind of like face palming the whole time. Because technically speaking, the 4090 is a 4K graphics card. It is meant to be used at 4K. And at 4K, rarely is it ever bottlenecked by the CPU. Assuming you're playing a modern game. Now, if you're playing an old game that's not that graphics intensive, then yeah, even at 4K resolution, the 4090 will be bottlenecked by the CPU. But if you're not using the 4090 at 4K, then you're not really seeing what it's capable of. You're not really seeing the maximum potential of the 4090. Anyway, YouTube crime drama. Look for... Wait, what? Does this have to do with the Apple factories in the China thing? While AMD was trying to get rid of their fabs, NVIDIA could focus all in on their stack. Yeah, that goes way back, Nero. That was like 2000s decade. Dude, that was like almost 20 years ago. How is Apple so profitable? Oh, you were explaining? No, I still don't understand. I don't understand how they're so profitable because at this, like, think about it. Their stuff is made in the same factories as like all the other stuff. So like all the Apple laptops are made by Foxconn, and I'm pretty sure Asus and all the other guys making laptops are also coming out of the same factories. So the fact that Apple sells for ridiculous prices though, like their Apple desktops are what? They start at like $5,000 minimum, $6,000 or some ridiculous amount of money. Something like that, right? So it's all mobility, though. It's all mobility. Because Apple desktops are low volume. And Apple laptops are... They're also still kind of low volume, although they're definitely higher volume than you would think. But Apple's price points have always been high. They were the ones that always drove the price of the phones up, though. Like, remember, Apple was the first to start selling a $1,000 phone. They standardized the practice of charging $1,000 for a phone. And back then, people were saying how... I forget what year that was. What was that? Was that like 2017? Whenever the iPhone X came out, that was like the first $1,000 phone. And you know, they were they were the first ones to do it, and then Samsung's followed suit, and now everybody's got like a super high-end phone as well. But at the end of the day, like, are those $1,000 phones actually worth $1,000? Like, if they're literally just the next generation of what the previous generation was, but now they're like almost double the price. It's kind of weird, you know what I'm saying? So somehow they're able to sell the general public on an image, on a lifestyle, on a emotional journey, and they're able to market that so well. Somehow psychologically they can pull that off, and they can get so much hype and buy-in for their products, for their iPhone in particular. And even with Steve Jobs gone, I mean, Steve Jobs has been gone for over a decade, and they're still doing it. They're still pulling it off, and people are still crazy about them. And then they're innovating in ways where you would not expect. Like, Apple currently has the highest single thread performance CPU. So if somebody asked me what CPU has the highest single thread performance, the answer is not Intel, nor is it AMD, and it's definitely not Qualcomm. No, the answer is Apple. The M3 still has the highest single thread, and the M4 is coming out later this year. So it's like Intel is basically trying to copy Apple, and everyone's trying to copy Apple. Microsoft wants to copy Apple, like they want the Windows system to be primarily on ARM. So I don't know what that means for x86. It could be the beginning of, like, this year could mark the beginning of the end for x86 as we know it. And what doesn't help, what further reinforces that statement, is the fact that you have Amazon and all the cloud providers also wanting to copy Apple and do their own CPU designs, which are, you guessed it, all ARM-based designs, or at least RISC, but ARM-based designs, generally speaking. So they're going to slowly move away from x86. This could be the beginning of the end for Intel, because even if AMD continues to outperform Intel in the x86 space, that overall TAM is going to continue to shrink every year as the ARM TAM grows larger and larger. On top of that, as soon as you have the software developers pushing ARM and all migrating over to ARM and creating native versions of their applications that run in ARM natively, that will be the signs of the time. That will be the writing on the wall for Intel and AMD. That x86 is on the way out, and it's a sinking ship. And if you want to survive, you're going to have to get out. You're going to have to build your lifeboat, which is going to be an ARM-based CPU. And you're going to have to pivot and migrate off of x86. So who knows where we could be 10 years from now if x86 will even still be around. It could end up a dinosaur of the old world, like Fortran and the old programming languages that no one uses anymore, like COBOL. You know what I'm saying? Like, it could change. The ecosystem can change. It's hard to see it, but we'll see. Like, AMD already was working, like, a long time ago, before Ryzen, AMD was actually working on a ARM-based CPU. Now, they dropped it to focus all their effort on Zen. But I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere in AMD there's a secret project, there's a secret team that's working on an ARM-based CPU. In fact, I'll go so far as to say that I would not be surprised if there is a top secret team within Intel currently working on an ARM-based CPU. Because they have to be ready. They have to be ready. As soon as the software developers jump ship and go all in on ARM, they know that that's the end. That's the end for x86. They wouldn't do that at most. They would use an ASIC to handle. Who? Who would do an ASIC? Why would you not develop a native ARM CPU if there's a threat of no one using x86 instructions anymore for their apps? No, I don't agree. They would definitely be making an ARM-based CPU. Oh, you're talking about ARM? Watch or AMD put x86 and ARM on the same chip. No, they wouldn't do that. Yeah, no, I agree. Nero, they're not going to do two. No. That's too much silicon and too complicated to have two different instruction sets supported like that. No. There was in theory, there was an idea that AMD had back like in 2014 to develop something like that, but it never happened. By today's standards, no, it's going to be one or the other. You're going to go all in on x86 or you're going to go all in on ARM. Look at Qualcomm. Qualcomm, obviously, they don't have an x86 license, so they have to go ARM, but they're all in on ARM, and they're going to do emulation for x86, and they're going to continue to do that until the developers make native versions of their software that runs on ARM. So here's the thing. What will end up happening is if the native versions of these apps can run at the same performance, they can give you the same performance that you get on an x86 native application for the exact same application, then that questions whether or not x86 needs to exist. Meaning, an ARM-based version of an app or a game doesn't need to outperform the x86 native version. It just needs to come close or equal the x86 to immediately have the snowball effect of everybody now jumping on board with ARM and abandoning x86. Why? Because Apple's ARM, almost all mobility apps that are designed for mobile devices like smartphones are all ARM-based. If you look at the gaming market, the vast majority of the most profitable games are on mobile devices, which means the most profitable games are already on ARM-based platforms. So it becomes more difficult, more challenging to justify an x86-based app, having to write the code for that app and then also support and patch and update and manage and continue to develop for that app over the years, versus, and then having to support both versions, like having an ARM version, having an x86 version. That creates more overhead, that creates more debugging, that creates more requirements for programmers to be on staff and all this other stuff. So it's not a good thing. And that's the reason why I think what we have witnessed this year with Qualcomm and the Snapdragon X Elite, even though it may not look that great compared to the new AMD Ryzen AI today, we'll see what happens next year. We'll see what happens 2 years from now, 3 years from now. How will the ecosystem in the software space change? Which I think will ultimately be the determining factor in whether or not x86 continues to maintain its position in the market for the computing platforms that it works on today and operating systems like Windows and Linux, versus everything slowly migrating to ARM and having x86 die a slow and painful death. And I think the main teller or market indicator will be more ARM-based CPU brands. So, for example, NVIDIA. If NVIDIA themselves enter the CPU market sometime in the next 2 to 3 years with their own ARM-based CPU, alongside Qualcomm, I think that will be a huge boon to really get ARM adoption like off the ground and launch it, like propel it way up there in terms of software adopters, like people just going all in on ARM, because Nvidia's gonna go big on ARM. They already are trying. Nvidia is not a company that you want to be competing against. They are a very, very difficult company to compete against, for all the points that I mentioned earlier. And I think the last thing Intel wants to deal with right now is having to compete directly with Nvidia in the CPU space, because they've already been competing with AMD since time immemorial. Apple has done their own thing, which is like whatever. They used to use Intel CPUs. They don't use Intel CPUs anymore. So Intel has lost all of that revenue. And then now we have Qualcomm entering and making declarations like, we will have 50% of the Windows market share within 5 years. You know, so, or I don't know if it was Qualcomm or if it was ARM. One of them said, we will be at 50% of the Windows market share within 5 years. That is a declaration of war. For those that don't understand what that means, that's literally a declaration of war against Intel x86. I mean, AMD's is kind of there too. So it's like, yeah, okay, you're in there too, right? So it's almost like AMD and Intel, the once mortal enemies, might actually have to band together in some weird twist of fate to combat the greater evil from their point of view. Who knows? Who knows how that's going to play out? x86 is too old. ARM is going to scale, do a third one. I think ultimately ARM is probably going to win, man. I can't see x86 sticking around a whole nother decade. Like, unless there's some kind of massive innovation in the x86 space, I don't really see. It's the beginning of the end as far as I'm concerned. I'm pretty sure, especially if Nvidia jumps into the CPU market with an ARM CPU. Like, the last thing Intel needs right now is Nvidia to jump into the free-for-all that's taking place right now. They're already losing to AMD. Qualcomm is a huge threat. You know why? You know, a lot of people don't understand why. Like, everyone's like, why am I talking about Qualcomm? You guys don't understand the business aspect of it. It's not even about Qualcomm and Intel directly. It's because Microsoft is backing Qualcomm. It's almost like what goes around comes around. Intel and Microsoft, symbolically speaking, years ago, Intel and Microsoft conspired to remove IBM, to displace, to dethrone IBM from the PC market. The two of them conspired behind IBM's back to pull the rug out from IBM. So IBM lost its position as king of x86, and Microsoft and Intel together, alongside their partners like Dell and Hewlett-Packard, and later others, but mostly those two initially, took over the Windows PC space. What used to be the PC DOS space became the Microsoft DOS space, and then it became Windows as we know it. And so it's almost like now Microsoft, once the deceiver and betrayer of IBM, is now doing the same thing. All these years later, Microsoft once again is betraying their hardware partner. So they're now they once betrayed IBM, now they're betraying Intel in favor of ARM-based CPUs. So, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. It's a tough road right now. Pat Gelsinger is in a really tough spot. It's a really tough spot, man, to be in Pat Gelsinger's shoes. In fact, there was another article about layoffs. Here it is. Here we go. This might be the last article of the live stream, but man, this is all doom and gloom. Intel to reduce headcount by 15% by the end of 2024. So this is further signs of the time. Rumors were true. Over 19,000 people will lose their jobs at Intel. So this is not good for a lot of people. Pat Gelsinger is in a really tough spot. All those things I told you, part of this, tinfoil hat time, Microsoft is to blame because they are the betrayer. They are the great deceiver. They have now deceived Intel. They have went behind them and stabbed them in the back and allied themselves with ARM, the arch enemy of x86. Because remember, what Microsoft wants, Microsoft gets. It's that simple. When it comes to the Windows system, it's their operating system. And if they're favoring one over the other, ultimately the one that they support heavily will be the ultimate winner. This played out in the late 80s, early 90s, guys. It's already happened. It's literally history repeating itself. This is the sort of thing that 5 years from now, a decade from now, this will be a university case study for an MBA student having to look at a study case of how one company failed, how companies interact with each other, how they partner up and then backstab each other. It's basically like Intel and Microsoft were married. They were a married couple. They got a divorce. Microsoft is remarrying Qualcomm, or I guess ARM, so to speak. And that's what's happening here. And now we see it playing out in the open field. Microsoft owns OpenAI. Yeah, Microsoft owns OpenAI, right? What is this OpenAI could take Microsoft down? I don't understand. What exactly does this have to do with anything? Okay, the AI piece of this is one thing. But I'm talking about the fact that Microsoft is favoring ARM long-term over x86 as an architecture that they want their operating system to exist on. Because Apple is using ARM for a long time, and look at how successful they are, and they're probably like, hey, how can we be more successful like Apple? Let's do what they do. Apparently they know what they're doing. And guess who's also following Apple? Intel is following Apple. Intel's looking at Apple. Oh, Apple's so successful. Let's do what they do. What do? Oh, they don't have hyperthreading. Let's throw away SMT. That's a good idea because Apple's doing it. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to get the same benefits, but that's what they're doing. So we'll see what happens with Intel's new CPUs. I think they're going to be pretty interesting overall because they no longer have hyperthreading. Okay, Intel has released its earnings report for the second quarter of 2024, revealing a loss of $1.6 billion, exceeding the previous quarter's loss. The company has suspended dividend, which contributed to over 10% loss in Intel stock value after market closure. Oh, that's going to cause them to lose even more. Wow. Suspending the dividend might not be a good move because that's just going to cause a lot of people to panic sell Intel stock, and that's just going to drive the stock down even more. So I don't know, man. I don't think suspending the dividend was a smart move. I mean, unless they're only suspending it for 6 months or something, for 2 quarters, that's bad. Suspending a dividend is never a good thing because it means that it signals to investors that you yourself as a company are no longer confident in yourself. So it's always a bad sign when that happens. It means that there's clearly something wrong. The sky's on fire. We need to do something fast, but we're not sure what we're going to do, so we're going to suspend dividends. So that does not drive investor confidence. That has the complete opposite effect. That makes the stock go from like a maybe to a like no. So not good. CEO Pat Gelsinger described the financial performance as disappointing, despite the company meeting its targets in process technologies. Gelsinger noted that the second quarter results were affected by gross margin headwinds from the accelerated ramp of AI PC products. I don't know what he means. Okay, I guess what he means by that is they spent a lot of money on TSMC to build Lunar Lake and Arrow Lake, but they haven't launched them to the market yet. So, well, it says here in the article, so the journalist is saying this likely pertains to the Meteor Lake launch, which did not meet its original goals. Okay, so yeah, they did launch Meteor Lake. It was kind of a paper launch, although it is readily available now. Almost a year, about 9 months after its launch, it's readily available now. But all the while, they've been having to buy an expensive TSMC node and build up inventory of a lot of chips that they aren't currently selling, because you can't buy an Arrow Lake CPU, you can't buy a Lunar Lake laptop. So it's like they've already bought all that capacity and they've already manufactured all these parts. There's already BIOSes. Well, I don't know about BIOSes, but there's already, like, we already know the socket exists. It was at Computex. So, but they aren't able to sell any of it yet. So that's why, that's kind of his excuse as to why the second quarter results are so bad. It's like, hey, we spent a lot of money to build all this stuff, but we're not actually selling any of it yet. So it's kind of like a giant CapEx expenditure. Our Q2 financial performance was disappointing even as we hit key product and process technology milestones. Second half trends are more challenging than we previously expected, and we are leveraging our new operating model to take decisive actions that will improve. So the reason why it was more challenging was because most people just went and bought like 13th gen laptops or AMD laptops. That's the reason why it was so challenging. Because they were hoping that their customers would purchase Meteor Lake laptops, but very few people did. Like, do you know anybody that has a Meteor Lake laptop? Like, I don't. So, I mean, okay. So that's one of the reasons why it's disappointing. Because most people went and bought either an AMD 8040 or a 7000 series laptop, or they bought a 13th gen or even a 12th gen on clearance. And the reason why they did that was because Meteor Lake actually had worse performance in a lot of areas, especially multi-thread, versus the previous generation Raptor Lake laptops. And that was part of the reason. And then, of course, like AMD laptops are very competitive, especially with the iGPU. But Meteor Lake's iGPU is pretty good. So, but other things are bad, like battery life was not as good as it was supposed to be. You know, it was lacking in multi-thread. It was just kind of, it was loud. People would put the laptop to sleep. If they put the laptop to sleep at like 90% battery, they wake up the next day, it's like 65% battery remaining. And they're like, what's going on here? That was a huge problem with a lot of Meteor Lake laptops at launch. So, you know, it's just kind of, it was a very meh kind of product, so that's kind of why they're having challenges. So he says here, we are leveraging our new operating model to take decisive action that will improve operating and capital efficiencies while accelerating our IDM 2.0 transformation. These actions, so he wants to transform the company. He wants to radically change Intel. These actions, combined with the launch of Intel 18 next year, 18A. So they're going to their Angstrom nodes, like they've been talking about. That's coming next year. With them, it always seems like it's next year. I mean, they've been saying next year for the last 5 years. To regain process technology leadership, will strengthen our position in the market, improve our profitability, and create shareholder value. Okay, well, suspending the dividend doesn't really... I mean, all the stuff that he said is good, but it's like, it's one thing to say a bunch of stuff, but then, you know how they say, actions speak louder than words. He says all this stuff in words, but then they suspend dividends. Yeah. Intel has been investing heavily in its foundry business, significantly impacting expenses. However, the company remains profitable in markets such as client computing and data centers. Okay, so where they're having problems with AI. Like, Intel's having trouble selling their AI product, like their Gaudi 2 and all that stuff, because people are just dumb and they just hear NVIDIA and they just blindly buy NVIDIA. I mean, AMD is no stranger to that, right? Like, AMD's all too familiar with like putting a product out there and then everyone just buying NVIDIA instead. So Intel's learning the hard lesson. It's like, they put out an AI chip, come buy our AI chip. It's 50% better than everyone else's. People proceed to go and buy NVIDIA's thing instead. That's what's happening to Intel in the AI market. But then also, they're still doing good in client computing. So that's laptops, desktops, and then data center would be servers, obviously. So they're still good, but like I said, they're maintaining their status quo. Their buyer is typically the person who doesn't understand technology that well. I mean, not saying that they don't know anything about technology. They're just not keeping up with the latest trends in technology. And their client computing sector is typically enterprise customers who need to buy 5,000 laptops for all their employees. Every 3 years, they swap them out on a lease. So that basically what that means is Intel is still selling most of their CPUs to pre-builds, to mostly laptop manufacturers like Dell, like Lenovo. And that's their bread and butter for a lot of their chips. Because it's much easier to sell, I can sell 50,000 Raptor Lake CPUs, 13th gen laptop CPUs, to Lenovo so they can build all kinds of random laptops like IdeaPads, ThinkPads, Yoga, this thing, that thing, whatever. Sell all that off, and it's easier to do that than to try to sell a gamer, come buy my 13900K. It's like candy. It's good, Like, it's not gonna fail. It's good. Just get it. It's Intel. Intel's good, Like, it's harder to do that now compared to just bulk selling 50,000 CPUs to Dell or somebody. Just up front. It's like, here's 50,000 CPUs for, whatever. I'll give you like a 70% discount. And if you're going to buy double up on it, we're going to give you another 3%, 3 points or whatever. So, their margins are not that great anymore, but they're maintaining their profits in the client compute area. So, currently Intel employs over 130,000 people. As part of efforts to reduce operating expenses, the company plans to cut its workforce by 15%, resulting in approximately 19,500 layoffs by the end of this year. The company will streamline... Well, now what I don't know, they say end of 2024. I'm assuming that means calendar year. I don't know if they mean fiscal year or calendar year. I assume it's this year, which means December. The company will streamline its operations and meaningfully cut spending and headcount, reducing non-GAAP R&D and marketing. They're reducing... Okay, GAAP R&D and marketing. Oh, non-GAAP. Okay. General and administrative to approximately $20 billion in 2024 and approximately $17.5 billion in 2025, with further reductions expected in 2026. Intel expects to reduce headcount by greater than 15%, with the majority completed by the end of 2024. So, the first thing that comes to my mind is What does that mean for the folks like Tom Peterson or the guy that left AMD, Robert Halleck? He was the guy at AMD who would do a lot of like press coverage. Well, he would like talk to the press about Ryzen CPUs. Then he went to go work for Intel for some reason. Intel basically poached him. Is he gonna still be there? Is he on the chopping block? Like, what's going on here, guys? Like, Intel's gonna cut a whole bunch of people. Intel has confirmed that it reached. They already got rid of Raja too, which is like, I don't know, what are they gonna do with their GPUs? Intel has confirmed that it has reached important milestones with its client and data center products, including Panther Lake and Clearwater Forest, which will use the Intel 18 angstrom node. In the coming months, the company is expected to launch its Core Ultra 200 series, featuring Lunar Lake and Arrow Lake. However, the earnings reports do not provide updates on the graphics business or the release timeline for the Battle Mage GPUs. So, what this means is because of the disruption within Intel, the sundering that is going to happen over the next several months at Intel, there's going to be a huge reckoning, a huge sundering within Intel that is going to shake the fabric of the company's foundation. And as a result of this, we might not see any new Intel Battlemage graphics cards for a long time. For an undefined period of time, we will not see Intel GPUs because we don't know what they're doing with the business unit. They might be laying off copious numbers of engineers and staff that were working on Battlemage. Now, I'm just thinking hypothetically. Like, I have no idea if that's actually the case. I'm just trying to think, what do they need to do to reduce the cost? Because Pat Gelsinger said they're going to have to cut costs. So what are the areas where they are not competitive? Well, are they competitive in GPU? No, they're not. Let's be honest. They're not competitive in GPU. Why? Because for the bus width, for the memory, it's like, to the consumer, it sounds like a steal of a deal. It's such a good deal. However, when you look at what you're buying, it is severely underperforming against the competition. So as a result, they are totally not on par at all in the GPU market. And as a result, I think I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the job eliminations that they do are going to come from the GPU people. The people who worked on Raja's team before he left, working on Battlemage. Unfortunately, a lot of those people might be let go. And we don't know what's going to happen with Intel's GPU roadmap. They're executing on CPU. Obviously, they cannot stop on CPUs because literally CPUs is it's like their bread and butter. They have to have the CPUs. But I think the GPUs, it's not good, guys. This could be the end for a while, at least for a while, if not for a very long time, of the Intel GPUs. Do you think Intel will release Intel Bartlett Lake S? What is that? Is that the thing that's like only P cores or something? I remember hearing something like they were going to do like a P core only CPU. I wish they would do that, but I don't think they're going to. I mean, I wish they would make like a 10 core CPU again, like the 10900K. Memory capacity isn't that helpful. What? Yeah, but that doesn't matter. We're talking big picture here. That's like a micro detail that doesn't really capture the full thing that we're talking about in terms of job cuts. Yeah, let's say there is one with a 12. Yeah, man, that would be cool. I really don't like Intel's E-cores. I've never been a fan of the E-cores. Intel should just do all P-core CPUs or all E-core CPUs, which is literally what they do in the server market. Intel makes all P-core CPUs for data center, and they now have all E-cores for data center, and you can pick and choose depending on the use case. I feel like they need to do that on desktop, because I would want to see like a 10 core, 12 core P-core only, no stupid E-cores. Or if somebody wanted to build like a mini server on the cheap, give me like a 32 E-core CPU. You know what I'm saying? Just give me a 32 E-core CPU. Think about it like this. In the amount of space that they can fit 16 E-cores on an i9, remove those P-cores, they could easily scale up to like 56 E-cores if they wanted. They could possibly even get 64. Well, I don't know about 64, but maybe 64 on a newer node. They could get 64 E-core desktops. That would be interesting to see. But yeah, I think we're not going to see any Intel GPUs for a while, unfortunately. Let's put it this way. If we don't see a video from Tom Peterson in the next 2 months, there's a good chance we're not going to see Battle Mage until well into next year. If at all. Because what this means is, if this is true, they're going to lay off 19,000 people. There's a really good chance that they're going to lay off a lot of the people that worked on Battle Mage. And that means that we might not even get Battle Mage in the consumer desktop market. Intel might think, hey guys, we got to rethink, where are we strong? No one likes us in the gaming market for GPUs, so why do we even need to bother? You know, like, let NVIDIA and AMD just continue to fight it out like it's Mortal Kombat, whatever. We can get out of there. Instead, what they can do is they can do what they always do. They can go to the ODMs, the OEMs, and try to sell their GPUs into the enterprise market. And I personally think that is what they're probably going to do. I'm just thinking about it like this. What's easier for Intel to do? Try to get into the consumer GPU market, or try to get into the enterprise GPU market? And definitely the latter is much, much easier for them to do. So I think they're going to do that. I would not be surprised if they completely exit the client, well, the consumer market for GPUs, and just go all in on server, cloud, and so, because they can charge way more money to business customers for the per unit cost will be cheaper, but they're going to sell way more. So it's much easier. It's far less risk to sell, like 5,000 GPUs all at once to one customer than to try to sell, 5,000 to 3 or 4 different VARs, and then have them have to market, then have to assist them with marketing the product and spend time educating them on how to market the product. Nah, it's business to business is so much easier for them at this point. I would not be surprised if they completely exit the consumer market. Now, do I want them to? No, definitely not. I really want a Battle Mage GPU. So to me, this is very disappointing, but I have a feeling that this probably means that we're not going to see Battle Mage this year, at least this year, and at worst, never. Like, at least never in consumer. So we'll see what happens. I think that discrete GPUs in gamers' desktops is not something that they're going to try to pursue. They're going to try to do integrated graphics. They're going to keep doing integrated graphics. They're going to go all in on data center and enterprise, and that's what they're going to do. And that'll probably be a better, less risk involved with that. better potential return on investment. So if Pat wants to save the money and fix the problems, that'll be number one on the chopping block. Battle Mage and Consumer, gone. Off the table. We're not doing it. I think that's what they're going to do. Someone's going to have that tough conversation. But, yeah, that's not good. The fact that they didn't provide any updates on the graphics business or release timeline is very telling, because there were people that asked about it on the earnings call and they didn't have anything to say at this time, and that's never a good sign. So unfortunately, that's Intel's in a really bad spot. That's probably going to be it for this live stream. I don't know what else there is to talk about. We got Zen 5 next week, aka Ryzen 9000. Zen 4 CPUs are on a really good deal right now. Like, if you don't want to wait, there's some really good low prices on a lot of AMD CPUs right now. Star Wars Outlaws PC system requirements revealed. RTX 4080 and 7900 XTX recommended for 4K 60 FPS. This is interesting. So the minimum is a Ryzen 5 3600 or an Intel i7 8th generation. And the graphics card is either a GTX 1660 or an RX 5600 XT. And that's for 1080p 30 FPS low graphics with upscaler set to quality, which basically means sub 1080p for 30 FPS low. This is going to be a really hard game to run. All right, recommended 5600X Ryzen 5 with 3060 Ti, 6700 XT, and that will get you 1080p 60 on high with upscaler set to quality. Where's native? Okay, high. Ryzen 7 5800X or an 11th gen Intel with a GeForce 3080 or an RTX 4070 or an AMD Radeon 6800 XT. This will be 1440p 60 FPS with upscaler set to quality. Wait a minute. They really require upscaling with these graphics cards to hit 60 FPS? Okay, here we go. Ultra. You know what's stupid about this? Why are they listing, like, you know what I don't like about these system recommendations from the game developer? I hate how it's like minimum they tell you 1080p 30, but it's like low settings. Then when you look at recommended, it's 1080p 60 high settings. Not 1080p ultra native, 1080p high with upscaling. It's like, okay, what if I want to play the game at 1080p 60 ultra settings native? What do I actually need? Like, this is such a stupid thing to, like, what is this? And then 1440p, it's like, okay, 1440 60 FPS high. Okay, what about 1440p native ultra? What is this? Okay, then, this is what's funny. Then when you get to 4K, you know what's hilarious? On the lower resolutions, they're listing lower graphics presets with lower resolutions with upscaling. Then when you go up to 4K, it's like, okay, at 4K, they automatically decide to crank it up to ultra. Let's go ultra because it's 4K. We're not going to tell you what you need ultra 1440p or 1080p. We're just going to show you ultra 4K. Okay, ultra 4K with with quality upscale preset, which basically means 1440p 60 ultra needs a 5800X3D or a 12700K. So guys, remember what I said at the very beginning of this live stream when we were talking about Alder Lake? Remember what I said? The only scenario where I recommend 12th gen is for like older DDR4 systems. Isn't it ironic how the game developers... Because remember what I said. I specifically said that I would not recommend like a 12th gen Intel CPU unless you were going to pair it up with DDR4 on a really cheap motherboard because you didn't want to buy new memory. And I said I would treat it the same as if I was just going to get a 5800X3D to pair it up with DDR4. Because this is exactly what is listed for 4K Ultra. The 5800X3D and the Alder Lake i7. So they're basically in the same class. Okay, so they're recommending a GeForce 480 or GeForce 480, a GeForce 4080 or Radeon 7900 XTX. What's hilarious is how the RAM is still like 16 gigabytes dual channel. But whatever, I don't know why they're doing that, but okay. 65 gig SSD, okay, and 4K, this is 1440p. So basically for 1440p Ultra 60 FPS, you need some of the top tier graphics cards to even run this game. Yeah, this game's coming out August 30th, and it's going to be super hard to run. It looks like this game's going to be really hard to run, just based off of what's listed here. It is kind of sad. I will say that I feel like the introduction of upscaler technologies has almost become a crutch for game developers to fall back on because they can't get their games to run well at native resolution, whether or not it is a deficit in programming capability or what. Or they just made the game so graphically intensive for whatever reason because they're trying to make it have that cinematic experience. But I feel like the developers have proven that you can make a very good looking game that still runs very well at certain native resolutions. As long as it's like under 4K resolution, it should be fine. But I don't know. Anytime I see presets listed like or recommendations where it's like they're not telling me 1080p ultra. It's like 1080p high with upscaling, 1440 high, 1080p low, 30 FPS with upscaling. And then all of a sudden it's like 4K ultra. Well, okay, what about 4K high? What about 1080p ultra? Like why aren't they standardizing on something? You know what I'm talking? You know what I'm saying? Like they're not standardizing across the board on their presets. So very annoying. All right, you're going to bed? Yep. All right. Well, thanks for stopping by. We are actually very close to ending the live stream. I think there isn't really much more to talk about. This week was kind of light on news. Next week is going to be Zen 5. I'm guessing the Intel BIOS update will come out within the next 3 weeks. So we'll report on that again. Upscaling should never be used for... I know. I agree. I hate how they do that. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. Like... Because what's stupid about this is like... What if somebody has a GPU that doesn't support a certain upscaler technology? You know what I'm saying? Like, what if somebody has a 1080 Ti? Or something. Like, where do they stand? Where does that fall in? I guess it's like, okay, they gotta go and look. Okay, 1080 Ti is faster than this and this. So it should fall somewhere above this? But it can't use DLSS? So it has to use FSR. So it's just, what a joke. And what's funny is Intel Arc is actually here. Intel Arc, notice how they specifically call out rebar. That's so funny. Intel, for 1080p 30 low graphics, with quality upscaling, a Intel Arc A750 with rebar on can handle the game at 1080p 30. That's the only time they list an Intel GPU. After that, it's like, nope, there's nothing here that competes with these. Nope, it just keeps going further up. Nope, nothing. So, because it's so stupid, people are going to look at this and they're going to be like, they're not going to read the fine print. They're going to glance at this and they're going to be like, okay, 4K, 60, Ultra, I need a 4080 or an XTX. So then they're going to go ahead and buy one of these and they're going to turn on the game, crank up their 4K monitor, Ultra preset, and they're not going to be getting 60 FPS. Because they didn't read the last part here. Oh man. Wow. Anyway. Alright, well, that's probably going to be it. That's going to be it for this week. We'll be back next Thursday. I'm pretty sure next Thursday is the launch day for the Ryzen 7 and the Ryzen 5 9000 series CPUs. So I'll probably be back with a 9700X. And I don't know what I plan to do. I need to do the review for that CPU. So I'm probably going to just do the unboxing and then just put it into a system and then do all the tests. I don't know if I'm going to do a live stream build. I think a lot of people like my live stream build videos. I don't do them that often, so they're kind of rare. Maybe I'll do that. I don't know. I don't know if I'll do that, but we'll see. I could always, like, disassemble the PC and then build it live, but I don't really see the point of doing that. I mean, that's just going to waste thermal paste and stuff. But anyway, we'll see. We'll see what I end up doing. But expect to see content on a 9700X next week. We're going to do lots of videos. We're going to be doing a build video, overclocking video, DDR5 video, overall, you know, like 4 sticks of DDR5, 2 sticks of DDR5, anything from like 48 gigs of RAM all the way up to 192 gigs of RAM, and everything in between. Games look better at native 1440 than upscale. Well, yeah, upscalers are stupid because it's like false advertising. I just think of them as false advertising because it's not native resolution. It's like, okay, like what? But anyway, all right, guys, that's gonna be. Are you gonna join the VC? Maybe. We'll see. I got something I gotta do real quick, but I might stop in there briefly. All right, guys, we'll be back next week with some Zen 5 launch coverage on this channel. Expect to be having a discussion on motherboards and RAM. I thought I was going to talk about DDR5 this stream. We kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, like in the first half. But I think we'll have more. I'll definitely have more to say once I get my hands on the actual CPUs in terms of like what's the sweet spot for Gear 1. I think the sweet spot for Gear 2 is already well understood at this point, but we'll see if the F clock is different from what everyone has been saying. So that remains to be seen. So anyway, expect to see more content on the channel regarding DDR5, motherboards, CPUs, all that kind of stuff. And if you like this sort of content and you're new to the channel, feel free to subscribe to the channel. It does help me out. It does motivate me to keep making these type of videos and doing these live streams to engage with the audience that is passionate about PC DIY. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Once again, take care, you guys, and I will see you guys next Thursday on Tech Thursdays. Until then, I'll catch you next time. Thanks.